Australian Bitcoin podcast, presented by HardBlock, Australia's first Bitcoin-only exchange.
Hello and welcome to the Australian Bitcoin podcast. My name is Daniel Wilczynski. I'm the founder of HardBlock. On today's episode, we will be talking about the latest Bitcoin news of the past month. Today is the 3rd of February 2025. Bitcoin price is just below 100,000 US dollars, around 96,000 last time I checked. And with us, we've got a very special guest. For this episode, we've got Chris, one of the organizers of Bitcoin Alive, which is Australia's most important Bitcoin event. How are you, Chris?
Good, Daniel. Yeah, thanks for having me back on the podcast. It's good to have a chat. Sorry if I rudely took my headphones off. I noticed you were about to mention the price of Bitcoin, so I thought I'd remove myself from that noise just because that's something that I don't do. So whatever that number was, hopefully everyone's happy about it.
I forgot about that. Okay. Well, you still you've been doing that for a few years. It's
over 3 years now.
I'll try to be more considerate next time.
It's fine.
Yeah. Anyway, so maybe we will start talking about actually a little bit about Bitcoin Alive. How's that going? What can we expect at this year's event?
Yeah, cool. Happy to start there. So we're moving into our third year running Bitcoin Alive, which is really exciting. I think there'll be a number of different changes. Obviously, we're still relatively small in scale comparatively to some of the other more established global conferences that have larger backing and run by bigger teams. But we're starting to make waves. People are starting to take notice of Bitcoin Alive. It is now a thing that exists in Australia. So one of our early goals was very much to make Bitcoin Alive be part of the global circuit of Bitcoin events. So, when you think of Bitcoin conferences, I know you've been to a few, I know I've been to a few. They're generally always in the Northern Hemisphere, somewhere in Europe or somewhere in America or somewhere around there. We wanted Bitcoin Alive to be part of that conversation when people said, hey, I'm going around conferencing this year. What are the options available? Now there's an option, down under in Australia. But in terms of this year's event, obviously, whilst I mentioned I don't check the price, I'm well aware that we did reach a particular important milestone over the last sort of quarter or so. So I was unable to avoid the fact that we hit 100K. Where we are now, I'm not sure, but I know we did hit 100K at some point. Hopefully, we're still above it for all those people playing along at home. But, our first 2 years of running Bitcoin Alive were more or less in the trenches of the bear market. So sentiment was low. You've been running a Bitcoin business for almost probably as long, if not longer than me, Daniel. You're well aware of the cyclic nature of this industry. Generally, everything goes around in 4-year cycles, more or less. And with that comes sentiment changes, engagement, conversions, all of that stuff ebbs and flows with the price of Bitcoin. And so now we're going into a more bullish part of that cycle. And so hopefully, I would like to think that the sentiment within the event and the number of attendees and just the general vibe is also a lot more positive than what it perhaps was been. Not that it has necessarily been negative at the event. Everyone's been enjoying themselves. But, market conditions are very much a big driving force with how everyone's feeling. So we're excited to run our first event in what appears to be a bull market. So that should hopefully make a lot of things easier in a number of areas. But one of the other things I think is a noticeable difference with this year's event compared to the last two events that we've run is, we're trying to make Bitcoin Alive and Bitcoin to an extent more accessible and more open to, those who are not perhaps in the direct Bitcoin community or the direct Bitcoin circles. So, you're well aware of all of the different Bitcoin meetups that are around this country. I know you've got a hand in the Adelaide meetup. There's one here in Sydney. There's one in Brisbane, Melbourne, Perth. They're all over the country, and they're great. And Bitcoin Alive was, I guess, the connective tissue to bring all of those independent local meetups onto a national stage once a year. But what we want to see now is, people outside of that community that are perhaps on the fringes of being a Bitcoiner or understanding Bitcoin and wanting to learn about Bitcoin, getting them to come along to Bitcoin Alive. And so one of the things that we've done this year is, you may have noticed, we've announced probably about a dozen or 15 speakers on our website. Some of those names are names that haven't featured at Bitcoin Alive in prior years, and perhaps come from some of those tangential communities that aren't, directly involved with Bitcoin Alive. So, for instance, we've announced Pete Evans as a speaker for this year's event. For those that know Pete Evans or that name rings a bell, he is a long-time chef. He's an author, filmmaker, and a number of other things, but most people would know him from his endeavors as a chef. Written a bunch of cookbooks, been involved with a number of different, cooking TV shows, so to say. But he's been a Bitcoiner for a number of years as well. And so, he more or less got cancelled, so to speak, when the whole COVID thing happened, and a lot of, public understanding of Pete shifted. Depending on what side of the fence you are, you've probably got a different opinion on whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. But yeah, it turns out he's a Bitcoiner, and his community is interested in things like freedom and health and taking personal responsibility. So they're all really similar principles and properties that a lot of Bitcoiners try to abide by. One of our efforts is to sort of get into some of those communities that are likely to be Bitcoiners at some point, but perhaps don't know it or haven't had the comfortability to be able to approach Bitcoin at one of those local meetups or whatever it might be, whatever their reason for being on the fence about Bitcoin. Hopefully we can get them to come across and learn a few things about Bitcoin and really engage with all the other great Bitcoiners in this country to find out, hey, I'm not alone. There's a whole buzzing community of Bitcoiners that I can learn from and that I can converse with and I can make friends with and socialize and all of those great things. So we're really excited about that, about the angle of, trying to attack, the next wave of Bitcoiners. Because as you and I both know, Bitcoin is for everyone, including your worst enemies. So at some point in time, everyone is going to be a Bitcoiner. So we're just trying to bring that forward. It's part of our responsibility, I guess, as the national Bitcoin conference in this country, is to try to get more Bitcoiners coming into the community.
Yeah, well, I like, it's good to have always kind of people kind of on tangential topics. And we have some of that in the Bush Bash, like whether we're topics sometimes, on homesteading or like kind of living off grid or something like that, or like privacy.
100%.
And I enjoy those topics. Like I think, probably the lion's share would be like more Bitcoin, but having something different kind of put in, like that's kind of interest. I personally enjoy that. So I think that's good.
Yeah, me too. And like another one would be, and this actually did happen at the Bush Bash. You and I were both there a few months ago, and we saw the Libertarian Party do a presentation on their Bitcoin policy that they've been working on for the last several months. So we've got them coming along to Bitcoin Alive, and they're actually going to be doing the full announcement of that Bitcoin policy, which is really exciting. Be political or be apolitical, that's sort of beside the point. The point here is that Australian political party is starting to take notice of Bitcoin and actually building a Bitcoin-specific Bitcoin policy as part of their grander policy that they have in their political party. Whether that was the Greens or whether that was the Liberal Party or the Labor Party or whoever it might be, if they were doing any of those things, they would also too be invited to Bitcoin Alive to speak about that, because again, this is a groundbreaking part of history here in this country that never before have we had a political party say, hey, we're going to talk about Bitcoin and we're going to make a policy specifically dictated towards that asset class. So that's something really exciting as well. And with that, we hope another set of tangential community comes along with that. Libertarians seem to be quite overlapping with a lot of the properties and principles that many Bitcoiners believe in. So it's they seem like an easy target, so to speak. They understand many of the problems. We now need to present them with the solution to broken money, which is Bitcoin. So really excited about that as well.
Yeah, and also there's a few returning guests. I noticed you have some international guests are returning, which is a good thing. It probably means they enjoyed themselves, and you can kind of build up that momentum that you said, to put it kind of on this global circuit. If like each year some of the previous attendees come back and some new ones come, I think like what are some of the kind of returning attendees from like the kind of international ones, some of the returning speakers?
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's probably one of the most difficult aspects of running a Bitcoin only conference in this country is finding international guests to come along.
Because
They
we're
all
so
want
far
to.
away.
We're so far away. Yeah, logistically, it's an absolute nightmare. And, they're all tend to be hopping around the Northern Hemisphere between Europe and America and Central America and all these other places where there are conferences. They're nice and easy to get to. The minute you ask them to jump on a plane for 30 hours straight, they say, oh, now it's a bit of a different question. I've always wanted to come to Australia, but it's a really, I've got my family and I've got, everyone has all different sorts of commitments. So that is very much one of the most difficult aspects of running our conference is trying to get the international Bitcoiners to come along. But yeah, like you rightfully said, we've actually managed to get Knut Svanholm to come back again. So he came to Bitcoin Alive in 2023. He was one of our headline speakers in our first year's event. He actually told me, and I like to think I'm actually quoting here directly, Bitcoin Alive was one of, if not his favorite conference that he'd been to. This was a few years ago, so maybe he's been to other conferences and had even better times. But he thinked quite highly of our event, and that was in our first year. So hopefully, he sees an increased experience, and we're pretty polished, but we'd like to think that we continue to get more polished over the years. But we're really, really excited to have Knut back. He fit in really well with the Bitcoin community here in Australia. He bought himself in a Cobra, and he was very jovious and jokeful, and he just had a great personality, and he was signing books and hanging out. Like, he was just a really, really, really enjoyable international guest. We've got a few more coming along as well for the first time too. We've got an Austrian economist from Austria coming along. So someone really, really technical in the sound money side of things, which is surely going to open up a lot of minds to people who perhaps haven't done that deep diving into that side of things. But yeah, lots of guests, but really, really difficult to get all the internationals to commit.
And before we move on to the news, just one final question. So if people want to buy the ticket, where do they go and what date is the conference?
Sure, yeah. So Bitcoin Alive will be March 8th, 2025. If you want to get a ticket or you want to check out any information, you can go to our website. That's probably the best place, www.bitcoinalive.io. You'll also find us across all of the standard socials, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Nostar, everything in between. Bitcoin Alive, you'll be able to search for us and find us there. Please reach out to us if you've got any questions, you've got any feedback, you're unsure about something. We're more than happy to have a chat. We're an open book.
Yeah, it's a great event, and yeah, the most. I think there's really no doubt it's the most important Bitcoin event, the biggest Bitcoin event in Australia. Anyway, we move on to the news. So there's a lot of stuff actually happening in the last few weeks. It's kind of an exciting time. So the first kind of event we'll cover is finally, after many years, Ross Ulbricht got released from jail. He's a free man. He got a full and unconditional pardon. So not just commutation, because people were thinking it's just going to be a commuting of a sentence. It's actually, so in some ways, in that aspect, Trump over-delivered and gave him a full and unconditional pardon. So what do you think of that, Chris? Did you think this would happen?
Obviously, I was optimistic and hopeful that it would happen one day in my lifetime. I didn't think it would happen now. To be honest, it could have happened a lot sooner. It should have never happened to begin with, in my opinion. Ross was given 2 life sentences plus 40 years for running a website. We can argue about what that website entailed, but at the end of the day, he was running a website. The reality of it is there are more darknet markets than ever before. And I should note that I am very familiar with Ross's work from 11 years ago. I guess I have to tip my hat to him. That was the first reason I ever heard about Bitcoin, was through this weird website called Silk Road. And there was this payment method called Bitcoin that needed to be used in order to service that website. And so I found that extremely interesting. That was what set me on the path of diving into Bitcoin, and here we are now almost 15 years later, and I'm all in and very much living the entrepreneurial life in the Bitcoin ecosystem. So yeah. I do thank Ross for the early adoption wave of Silk Road. But yeah, I think it's kind of crazy that someone could get given that sort of sentence for running a website, irrespective of what that website is. I know there are terrible websites all over the internet as it stands, including on the darknet. But 2 life sentences in 40 years seems a bit excessive. But yeah, I'm really, really happy that he's been pardoned. You're right. It sounds like Trump kind of over-delivered on the full and unconditional pardon, which is really great news as well. I'm so happy he's got his freedom back. I'd like to think he's certainly learnt a lot of lessons spending the last 11 years in jail, having to think about what he'd done, what put him there, and the ramifications of that. He's now got the rest of his life to go and enjoy it with his wife. And, I'm super, super happy for him.
Yeah. And by the way, so there were other people involved. So, okay, for those who don't know, Ross Ulbricht made Silk Road, the darknet marketplace, the original darknet marketplace, and everybody else involved in that, which includes some of the top drug dealers on it, and there were some actual officials, like FBI officials, admins and FBI officials who were investigating him and actually they were corrupt and tried to steal Bitcoin for themselves. Everybody, they got a few months to a few years. I think the average sentence was 6 years. And all these people got a few months. Yeah, average sentence was 6 years, where he got 2 life sentences plus 40 years without parole. And so
doesn't really make sense, does it?
It was extreme. I'll read the tweet that Trump posted when he mentioned the release. So I'll just read it. I just called the mother of Ross William Ulbricht to let her know that in honor of her and the libertarian movement, which supported me so strongly, it was my pleasure to have just signed a full and unconditional pardon for her son, Ross. The scum that worked to convict him were some of the same lunatics who were involved in the modern-day weaponization of government against me. He was given 2 life sentences plus 40 years. Ridiculous. End quote.
Yeah, I mean, look, I've held an opinion for a long while that they were really just trying to make an example of what the first one of these was, which is what Ross created with Silk Road 1.0. There have been subsequently, I've lost count, probably hundreds of these darknet markets that have come and gone. They've exit scammed, they've rug pulled, they've been servicing clients for years. The reality is, setting an example with Ross did nothing except make that marketplace and that idea multiply many times over. And to this day, you can still do exactly what you did on Silk Road 11 years ago. So I would argue that, their method failed. It didn't do anything. It just took away the freedoms of a man and put him in behind bars for a very long time. But yeah, super stoked Trump has done this. I think, even if you believe that what he did was wrong, 11 years is probably time served for the crimes that, he committed.
Yeah. And okay, so some other events kind of related to Trump's now being in office. So he got inaugurated, I think, in middle of January. So apart from releasing Ross, he also he done 2 things. He signed an executive order to ban central bank digital currencies. And he also established a presidential working group to create a federal framework governing digital assets, and look into the creation of a strategic digital assets reserve. So what do you think of these 2 things? The banning of CBDCs and creating a digital currency working group?
Yeah, well, I think one of them was kind of expected. It's been spoken about for quite some time, at least over the last 12 or so months. People have been discussing the idea of a strategic Bitcoin reserve. I guess the one surprise there is that they seem to have come out with some slightly different language and have left the door very much open to hold a reserve of a number of different digital assets. So I think a lot of Bitcoiners perhaps got a little upset by that wording because, this whole time we thought Trump was coming to Bitcoin Nashville. He was talking to the Bitcoiners. It was going to be an SBR, Strategic Bitcoin Reserve. And then they come out and they say, well, now it's going to be a bit of a stockpile of different things. I don't really know what the exact take on that is, whether that's just politicians doing political things, or if that's, I've heard rumors that the government already own a number of different digital assets through confiscation and a number of other means. So by them saying a digital asset reserve, it leaves the door open to do what they're already doing, which is holding Bitcoin and other things. That doesn't mean that they want to hold those other things as a reserve for the long term. It just means that they're capable of doing that because that's what they're currently doing. It's hard to say, we don't have a view into the office doors of what Trump's talking about and what his teams are discussing. I'm still hopeful that, they are smart enough to realize that there is only one digital asset that's worth having as a reserve. And that's obviously Bitcoin. It's not going to be Ethereum. It's not going to be Ripple. It's not going to be insert shitcoin here. It's going to be Bitcoin. That's the strategic reserve. That's what is strategic. I had heard some commentary about this, like irrespective of what assets you own, I'm a Bitcoiner. I know you're a Bitcoiner, but maybe there'll be people listening to this that hold things other than Bitcoin and speculate and trade on all those things. The one common denominator between all of those portfolios generally is Bitcoin. So, if you're talking about a strategic reserve, the strategic position is very much Bitcoin. It's not Cum Rocket, or it's not Dog Whiff, or some other crappy shitcoin. It's Bitcoin. So I like to hope that that's what their ultimate position will be. Maybe they've just relaxed the wording and the ruling around it. It's hard to know.
Well, I mean, maybe we just need to go on the journey that all individual Bitcoiners go, right? Where they start off, and most individuals start off like with shitcoining, and then they realize, okay, this is rubbish. So maybe the American government also needs to go on that journey. And, like I can see it, we're trying to get votes of all people holding digital currency. So they're trying to like get votes and please everybody. But if they start investing in it, they're going to realize that only Bitcoin really has the kind of infrastructure for these secure, to hold it securely in like billions of dollars. And only Bitcoin really gives you that kind of returns, frankly. The returns that they need, and like that preservation of value. That preservation of value, you get it from Bitcoin and you don't get it from the other things, and they don't have their ecosystem. So they will realize it eventually. If they don't realize it initially, they'll realize it eventually. But
everyone pays their tuition fee, right?
Yeah, exactly. So even the US government.
Even the US government. I think your other point is interesting as well. And that's probably something that maybe a lot of Bitcoiners perhaps didn't expect, because a lot of the discussion over the last, call it half decade, maybe a little less, has very much been CBDCs, central bank digital currencies. We've done a talk about it 2 years ago at Bitcoin Alive. We've actually got it scheduled in our program to have a discussion on it again in 2025. Even closer to home, there's been experimental things happening with central bank digital currencies. So for Trump to come out and say that we are banning the promotion and creation of anything that remotely looks like a central bank digital currency, I think that is something that I probably didn't expect. I'm very happy that they've decided to do that, because I think they're a terrible idea. Ultimately, a terrible idea will fall on its face in the free market, but we know it's not a free market because the government control a lot of things. And so if they start making even more and more controls of their currencies through a CBDC, that could certainly go down a slippery road. And I'd hate to see that happen. Obviously, Bitcoin is very much the opt-out, but, that's the reality of it, is Bitcoin is still very niche in the global scheme of things. So to see them make that ban is quite pleasing. What the ramifications of that is, I'm not sure. I've heard some people say that, that will just allow other countries to advance in that capacity. Maybe China will make their own CBDC. Maybe Russia will. Maybe the UK. Maybe France. And that'll leave America behind because they banned it. To be honest, I think that's a good thing. I think they've made a good decision. They should ban CBDCs. That is not the future. That is not the way forward, or certainly not the one that I want or I think will be successful. If they double down on the SBR and they ban CBDCs, those things go really, really nicely hand in hand.
Yep. Yeah. And just going back to the shitcoins thing with Trump, Trump also released his own shitcoin. I guess they're trying to raise funds. I think they released a Trump coin, which again, it's like, okay, whatever, like trying to raise funds. They're trying to get money, but don't let them get your money, by investing in that shitcoin.
I think he knows, like, if it's allowed, if it's legal, he's in office, like, he's going to do it, right? He's a money man.
Yeah,
like,
he's trying to make money. And I think, like, honestly, we don't really know all the details. We're just like, okay, it's legal. Somebody told him it's legal. We can do this to raise some funds. Okay. He said, okay, let's do it. Why not?
Seems pretty low risk for high reward. Make it happen.
That doesn't mean it's a good investment for, like, the person investing in it. But
it's a terrible investment.
Yeah, but something Jamison Loeb said something funny, and I'll paraphrase it. But he said something along the lines of, after Trump pardoned Ross Ulbricht, Jamison Loeb said he gives a perpetual pardon to Trump for any current and future shitcoining in return for his pardon for Ross Ulbricht. So I think that's
quite
my
generous.
position. Like, he gets a bit of a pass on the shitcoining. For releasing Ross, he can get a bit of a pass for the shitcoining. We'll turn a bit of a blind eye to that.
Look, I think you'll find out quite quickly that in the free market, these Trump coins and these meme coins are not going anywhere. You're not going to see the American government hold Trump coin in the strategic digital asset reserve. If they do, then they've completely gone mad. But I think you will see them do whatever they can to raise more money, like you suggested. And ultimately, if they're smart enough and they've got the right advice, which it appears to be that Trump is getting the right kind of advice and building the right kind of teams, respective of what kind of problems he's trying to solve. So I'd like to hope that he's got the right people, talking in his ear, like, hey, there's Bitcoin, and then there's everything else. Everything else is a speculative gamble, and Bitcoin is a special monetary asset. And that's the one that we should be focusing on with long-term prospects, not all this Trump nonsense or Ripple nonsense or whatever else is the flavor of the month. It changes too quickly. I can't keep up.
Yeah. So moving on to a different country that we like to talk about, El Salvador. And that's a place you've been to a few times, so you know about it well, so it'd be interesting to have your perspective. But as you know, I think on January 29th, they officially passed a bill, El Salvador that is, where they revised the law and took away Bitcoin's status as legal tender in order to conform with the IMF, International Monetary Fund, conditions for a loan. So they took away Bitcoin status as a legal tender to get a loan from the IMF. And people would have different takes on this. What's your take, as someone who has been to El Salvador, I think multiple times, right?
Yeah, I've been there a couple of times. Great country, really, really beautiful country to visit. I really enjoyed myself there. So I went there about 2 months after they made the initial Bitcoin law. So 2021 or 22, I think it was. My memory's bad, but one of those years. And then the following year as well, 12 months later, to see how it had been after 12 months of being in force. I haven't done a lot of about this recent news with the changes. It's, everyone speculated that they'd take the IMF's money and just smash buy Bitcoin. I think they did a little bit of that, maybe. Hard to know if they actually used the IMF money or if they used existing reserves to do so. But they've still been dollar cost averaging their one Bitcoin every day, and I don't think that's stopped ever since Bukele announced that. Well, geez, that must be at least 12, 18 months ago when they started doing that. So, they've got a healthy stack for a country. Most countries don't have any, so they're doing a hell of a lot better than the rest of the 200-odd countries that are out there in the world. But it is an interesting development. I do wonder, I'm not too privy with El Salvadorian law and current affairs, but I wonder, what are they doing that 1.4 million? From all reports, they've been reducing debt deficits and essentially trending in the right direction ever since Bukele's come into power. So I wonder if they needed a capital injection to do some more stuff that we're not privy of, more infrastructure plays. I'm not really sure. Perhaps someone that lives in El Salvador or follows it more closely would have a better understanding of that. That'd be my best guess, is that, hey, we just need cash flow. We need capital to be able to do whatever we do, and we're willing to make these sacrifices that the IMF have imposed on us, which, like you said, was the removal of legal tender status of Bitcoin. I think they just didn't want it being forced on the public sector. Random businesses in El Salvador by law had to accept Bitcoin, and they just weren't there educationally. They didn't have an understanding of what Bitcoin was. The infrastructure that the government had built had been a bit average. It's obviously improved over time, but the Chivo wallet was pretty stinky when it first got released. That was also one of the other conditions enforced by the IMF, was that they had to start scaling back, official government initiatives towards Bitcoin, and part of that is the Chivo wallet. So don't be surprised if you see that cease to exist over the next however long it takes them to wind that down. They're basically trying to put some level of stranglehold on El Salvador with what their Bitcoin initiative is. I see it as a bit of an ebb and flow. Like, they basically came out and said, screw you guys, we're doing this. They tried to threaten them. They said, you better not do this or else. And Bukele just gave them the finger and said, we're doing it. And now that they've been doing it for a couple of years, they've established themselves, they're in a better bargaining position to be able to have a negotiation with the IMF. So this is probably their happy place where both parties feel like we're getting something out of this deal. They're getting 1.4 billion. The IMF is getting a wind back on their Bitcoin position. I would like to think that it's going to continue nonetheless within the country. It's just going to be in a different flavor, perhaps a little diluted because there isn't that official government support. There's no official legal tender status. But it will be interesting to see how it all folds out, because look, a lot of capital and a lot of intellect has moved to that country with the promise of being able to take advantage of all of these Bitcoin native laws. And so with that potentially changing, to be determined how much, it's going to be very interesting to see whether these businesses then go, okay, well, now we don't have as much reason to be here because we have less certainty on the legal structure of Bitcoin. That's all going to be really, really fascinating. We're not going to have the answers right now. It's too soon, but we will know over the next few months, half a year. We'll start seeing trends. Is more capital flowing into the country, or is it now escaping? Are businesses moving elsewhere, or are they staying?
Yeah, but we're still, like, from my understanding, it's like for Bitcoin businesses and people wanting to use Bitcoin, they can still use Bitcoin. So, like, you can accept Bitcoin, and obviously very very friendly Bitcoin laws are still there, but basically people aren't forced to use Bitcoin. We're not forced to accept it. But for those people who want to, if you want to build a Bitcoin business or accept Bitcoin, or want to be pro-Bitcoin, or want to advocate for Bitcoin, it's still like a Bitcoin-friendly place.
Yeah, I think that will remain. I hope that will remain, but we'll find out over time. I think the other one thing that is kind of big on these changes is the fact that you're not going to be allowed to pay your taxes in Bitcoin moving forward. So the IMF have said individuals and businesses will actually have to settle their tax debts with the local tax authority in US dollars, because that's obviously the other currency. El Salvador doesn't have their own native currency. They've got Bitcoin and they've got US dollars. So they want El Salvador settling all of their tax bills in US dollars, which I think also kind of stinks. Like, if you're going to tax me on the thing, at least let me pay my tax with that thing. Like in this country, we get slammed with CGT if you sell your Bitcoin, but you can't pay your CGT in Bitcoin. So it's like, feels a bit wrong for you to be taxing me on it if you're not accepting the thing that you're taking from me.
Yeah. But so you're still on team El Salvador, is that correct? Team Bukele, you're still on it?
Well, yeah, look, I think he's been net positive for that country. What I think doesn't really matter a whole host, because I don't live there. I've just visited there and enjoyed my time there. But I think net benefit is still very much positive for that country. He's cleaned up the crime rates. He's making it a safer place for people to live. He's stabilized the economy. He's building infrastructure projects. All of these things are net positive. But, I'm always careful about cheerleading or going over the top with my support, because at some point in time, I've said this many times on my Twitter, everyone will let you down at some point in life. Some of the letdowns are minor, some of the letdowns are mistakes, some of them are intentional and very, violent, and everything in between. So as much as I am a fan of Bukele on paper, I'm always very tempered with the way that I hold that stance because, that could change at any moment.
Okay. Well, okay, we'll go on to some other news topics. So I've got a few others here, but so for this kind of second section, I'll probably just go through. We'll go through some of the news topics quickly, and if you have something like to add, you can jump in. But if not, then I'll just go through them. Okay.
Sounds good.
So I'll just list some of the topics, some of the news that occurred. So Tether and Lightning Labs announce USDT, which is Tether on Lightning Network. Tether has announced the integration of USDT into the Bitcoin's ecosystem, encompassing both its base layer and the Lightning Network. The integration is supported by the Taproot's asset protocol developed by Lightning Labs.
Interesting. I actually hadn't heard of that before.
Yeah, so it's coming on to Bitcoin. So it's kind of interesting because some people who don't know much Bitcoin think like they look at Ethereum or all these things like, oh, you can't do this stuff on Bitcoin. Like Bitcoin is not. You can build anything you can do on all these shitcoins. You can do on Bitcoin. It's not true. Like you can build stuff on top of Bitcoin, whatever you want, really. Like
I think what's happened is people have been impatient. Right? A lot of that stuff didn't exist until later improvements on the Bitcoin base layer or whatever that might be, Taproot and Lightning and all these things that didn't exist 5-6 years ago. But a lot of people wanted to make money now and they weren't willing to wait or help build out that infrastructure on Bitcoin. So they said, well, what's the next easiest thing? We'll just go spin it up on an Ethereum network and it'll cost us nothing and it will take us 20 minutes and we can start scamming people immediately. So I've always said anything that's been built on shitcoin chains, any good idea will eventually be built on Bitcoin if it's a good idea.
Yeah.
The problem is most of those ideas are not good.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say that. That's the key. Good idea. I think a lot, what you mentioned is correct. And so another reason is a lot of those things when built on Bitcoin is because they're just stupid and silly and they don't have a use case. And the reason people are not building them on Bitcoin because it's all just like hype and it doesn't 99 there is 1% maybe which is useful and 99% of it is just doesn't need to be in Bitcoin. Nobody wants to. It's fake. It's just marketing. And that's why.
So one of those things might be a stable coin, right? And so here we are now talking about it potentially being built on Bitcoin. I don't know much about this USDT with Lightning, so I'm not going to speak from it from a technical perspective because I've only just heard about it now. But to my point, if anything that is useful on these other chains is decided by, a large enough network effect that it should be useful on Bitcoin, then it will be built. It's only a matter of time before the technology allows for it, before the capital allows for it, before there's people that are interested in wanting to build and make money off that idea. But, the shit ideas will fail and they will remain on the shitcoin chains and they will die. The good ideas, if there are any, they'll surface and they'll be built on Bitcoin. I'm quite confident about that.
Yeah, correct. I agree. And so since we're on the topic of Tether, something related is Ledger co-founder. Ledger is a Bitcoin hardware wallet. So you're laughing, you know about this. So Ledger co-founder and his wife were kidnapped and then freed after a ransom kidnapping. I'll just give some background of it. So David Balland, he was a co-founder of Ledger. Ledger is a very successful Bitcoin or cryptocurrency hardware wallet. So he was pretty wealthy. I think I've seen estimates of his wealth of over $500 million. And he was kidnapped from his home. He was kidnapped from his home, and the kidnappers demanded a ransom. Actually in Tether. So that's very interesting in cryptocurrency in Tether. They were demanding a ransom in Tether, I believe. And I believe they wanted a ransom from his co-founders at Ledger. And his wife got also kidnapped. I believe the kidnappers actually like cut his fingers off, like as kind of like, and took pictures of that, kind of, to like
make things real.
Yeah, make things real. Yeah, so
I've heard that too. I don't know if that's true or not.
Okay.
I've heard reports that maybe it is actually true that he did lose a finger.
I'm not sure. Yeah. So in the end, him and his wife were rescued by the police in France, and I believe most of the 8 people got arrested in connection with the kidnappings. And since they used Tether and it's centralized, that got seized and frozen, which is anyway a bit silly.
I mean, that just proves the point, right? Like, if they were smart, they would have asked for the ransom in Bitcoin, and then, you know, they could have at least had total control of it. They still might have been, you know, choked off at exchange points or whatnot. But, you know, if you hold the private keys to a Bitcoin wallet, no one can do anything really to stop that in terms of moving it and owning it. So, yeah, they're not very smart. I think I've just thought of the idea, like, wouldn't it be a little ironic? And obviously this is a terrible thing to have happened, and I don't wish anyone being kidnapped. But the irony can't elude me here in that I wonder if this gentleman's... I'm not actually familiar with David, so I've got a long history with Ledger. I was the first person in this country to start working with them and reselling their wallets in Australia many years ago. I dealt with Eric more often, who was the CEO back in that time in 2016. So I'm not actually familiar with David per se. But wouldn't it be ironic if... I'm sure the listeners and you recall when Ledger's database got leaked and everyone's addresses and mobile phone numbers. It would be very ironic if his address got leaked by his own company that he founded, and then he got kidnapped for a ransom. Like, that would be, you know, nothing's funny about this, but that would be a little bit of a, you know, you couldn't help but giggle if that was the reason why his address was leaked.
Yeah, I don't know if that's correct. Yeah, that would be funny. Having said that, I did like from what I saw, he was pretty public, and he had a nice house, and he was actually sharing pictures of his house on Twitter and such, on social media, of his nice house and such. So
that OPSEC runs right through the company, right?
He was kind of exactly. Well, you're correct. Like, it actually shows kind of the mentality a little bit of the people working at Ledger in terms of OPSEC, and how they had that leak of people's like before of the people's addresses. So in some ways it is kind of a bit of a reflection of the culture from that perspective. But yeah, he was like kind of showing off his wealth from what I know, and showing off pictures of his very beautiful, very nice house.
Not a good idea. That just paints a target on your back.
Yeah. I mean, like, this story, it kind of like spooked quite a lot of Bitcoiners, to be honest. But you know, I would say on that topic, like, it's kind of also true that, you know, if this isn't something completely new, even before Bitcoin, like, he was a wealthy person, like possibly like close to $1 billion in wealth, and people did get kidnapped for ransom even before Bitcoin. This isn't something new. You know, especially when people, like rich people, travel, especially in like third world countries, frankly, it wasn't unheard of, you know, for people to get kidnapped. And, you know, in a place like France, the crime rate, it's not a secret of the crime rate is increasing, and it's getting more dangerous. It's not, like, it's not all to do with Bitcoin. This occurred even before Bitcoin. Although I do take the point that maybe Bitcoin makes it a little bit easier, this kind of ransom things, but it's not like, this isn't something completely new either.
Yeah, I mean, look, you're spot on. It scales better, right? If I rob someone's house and they've got like a whole bunch of gold in a vault, for me to steal that is going to be a lot more cumbersome than if I just, you know, chop a finger off and say, give me your 12 words or give me your 24 words or your hardware wallet or whatever. You know, I can run away with billions of dollars in the palm of my hand, and, you know, I can take it anywhere very easily. So yeah, whilst you're spot on, you know, this isn't something new. Ransom is going to happen all over the world for probably many years to come, irrespective of whether it's related to Bitcoin. But you're right, it hits home when it is Bitcoin, especially in the Bitcoin community. But you know, that these are all great reminders of what not to do and what to do with your security. There's no perfect solution. There are only trade-offs. And so you need to determine what are those trade-offs that you're willing to make. If you're Michael Saylor, you know, he's very vocal about that he doesn't control his keys. So, you know, that alone would ward off people to say, well, what's the point of going to him if he doesn't even have control of it? You know, if you're out there driving a Lamborghini and you've got a rich mansion and you're doing all these really extravagant things, you're just painting a target on your back, waiting for someone to come along with a $5 wrench and say, hey, give me your Bitcoin. So be really, really careful how you flaunt your wealth. As the number goes up, everyone's purchasing power goes up, and with that becomes a more lavish lifestyle for some. But just remember, stay humble, stack sats.
Yeah, and that's what a lot of Bitcoiners do. For those people who worry about this, one thing that might help, and what a lot of Bitcoiners do is make sure that the way they hold the Bitcoin, it's not kind of accessible. So even if somebody comes into their house or does some kidnapping, they don't that person. You don't have your stuff, your keys at home or whatever on you personally. It's kind of in a way where it's not easily accessible by you. So you don't even, it's distributed, and it's geographically distributed. And
Yeah. There's no right and wrong. There's just whatever you're most comfortable with and whatever you're protecting against. But all of these things are important factors to be thinking about when it comes to your personal security.
Yeah. Okay. So in terms of other mistakes not to make, we'll go into something else. So a Coinbase user has been sentenced to 2 years for Bitcoin tax fraud to surrender access to his 124 million Bitcoin fortune.
Wow.
Have you heard of this?
I briefly heard the headline, but I don't know much of the story behind it. I don't know why was he underreporting something, or was he?
Basically.
I'm not really sure. Yeah,
okay, so he was basically his capital gains tax. So in Australia, pay your capital gains tax and try and avoid it. But this was in America. So he was an early Bitcoin investor since 2011. Around 2015, he bought in a big way into Bitcoin. I think he bought over 1,300 Bitcoin in 2015. So he bought big around that time. And basically he started providing false information. He in the last 3 years he started selling off some of his Bitcoin, a portion of his stash, and but he underreported. He put up the cost basis of his Bitcoin. So he bought it for 495 on average. That was the price, but he put the cost basis, but he bought it as much higher, which would make it look like his actual capital gains were much smaller than what they were. And in essence, there was $1 million in capital gains tax that he didn't pay. And the US government isn't easy on that. They found out about it.
That was it. 1 million. That's what we tried to save. He had 124 million, and he tried to save 1 million, and now he's gone to jail for it.
Yeah, well, I mean, he didn't sell all his stash. I think he wanted to buy a house, so he was selling he sort of I guess 5 million or something around that amount. Yeah, that's correct.
And now he's lost everything, right? Because they've seized
I don't know if he lost everything. So I don't think he lost everything. He does have to go to jail, I believe, for 2 years, which is not good.
Not ideal
for him. Not ideal. And he does have to pay back the money he owns, plus I think a big fine.
Okay.
And from what I understand, he doesn't have to pay over 124 million. But he has to somehow hand it over. Does that make sense?
Until he gets out of jail, and does he get it back then?
Okay, so I'll read this. So maybe not hand it over, maybe give a location. Prosecutors requested the judge to force Ulbricht, that's his name, to reveal the location of at least 1,287 Bitcoin he moved in 22 via a mixing service, which are now worth 124 million after doubling. So he has to kind of surrender access, apparently. But it doesn't say he has to he loses ownership, but maybe he loses custody of it, something like that.
Right. I mean, look, if he gets out of jail in 2 years, he should have enough Bitcoin to pay his taxes off and his fines, and then he's still going to live a comfortable life and probably has learned his lesson.
Yeah, but once he's under custody, if the government gives him the custody back or whatever it does,
Yeah.
I'm sure he's not happy about surrendering custody.
No, that would be something I wouldn't want to do. Like, hey, here it is. You can view it on the network, and you can take a look at it on the public blockchain. But my keys are my keys. Like when I get out in 2 years, because I'm going to be a good boy in jail, I want to then pick my life back up.
Yeah. I wonder if Ross Ulbricht has any Bitcoin left. People have been donating some to him, but I wonder if he has any secret stash somewhere.
I read something that someone went through the very, very old court documents, and take this with a grain of salt because this is things you read on the internet. But apparently they went through the old court documents where, they were prosecuting him and doing all that stuff, and they found some Bitcoin addresses. And then they punched them into the network, to the Block Explorer, and they still have balances, and they have not moved for 11 years. So you can infer that, hey, if the court has said he owns this address and the Bitcoin's still there on the network and it hasn't moved, where is it? Does he have access to it? Has he buried it under a tree on a paddock and he's going to, go to it one day when he's free? So I'm sure there'll be a lot of investigators looking at these addresses. And if you ever see a single sat move, it won't take long for a breaking news tweet to be announced on social media. Someone will have said, hey, Ross Ulbricht's coins are on the move. But you're right. He's had a lot of Bitcoin donated to him. I think Kraken gave him $100,000. And I know a bunch of other people who have donated Bitcoin. He's going to be okay financially, I would think.
Yeah. By the way, I'm not sure if I mentioned it earlier in the episode, but there's a good book, American Kingpin. It's a very interesting book and very fun to read. And it tells the story of how Ross Ulbricht founded Silk Road and how he ran it, and then the investigation. I think it's a few years old now. I think it was released in 2017, but it's a great book. And when I read it as an audiobook. It goes well as an audiobook. It's easy to listen to, and it's very interesting.
I would also say, if anyone out there is into their murdery type podcast, Case Files has their own 3 or 4 part series on Ross Ulbricht and Silk Road from 5-6 years ago. If you just look up Case Files, and it's I think it actually references American Kingpin in that book a few times. So they're both great resources to listen to the full story of Silk Road. It's exceptionally interesting, irrespective of whether you're a Bitcoiner or not. It's really, really interesting story.
Yep. Okay, I've got I'll one other story I'll quickly mention is, have you know about hard wallets? Have you heard of this wallet called Tangem wallet?
Yeah, Tangem. Yep.
Tangem. Okay. So
and they have a nice stuff up recently. Is that what you're going to mention?
Yeah, that's correct. Yes. So Tangem, it's a hardware wallet. I've only started hearing about them the last few months. I think they're relatively new, and I think they're really focused on shitcoins, frankly, which isn't a good sign. And they had a really bad critical vulnerability. So somebody posted this on Reddit. I'll read, talking about the vulnerability. So I'll just read what the post says. So I'm quoting now. So basically, recent users found that Tangem mobile app steals and sends private keys to Tangem using emails. So user private keys remain in both user email history, Tangem email history, and perhaps in some Tangem ticket tracking systems, and are valuable for Tangem employees, which makes all Tangem users compromised. Tangem did not provide any sensible reaction, and the original post was deleted for some reason. What is happening? Why is everybody silent about this?
It doesn't get much worse than that, to be honest. If you want to end your business as a hardware wallet manufacturer, that's probably one of the quickest and fastest ways to do it. I've always been very critical of Tangem. A lot of people ask me, because of my history with hardware wallets, what do you think of this wallet? What do you think of that wallet? There's so many of these other companies outside of Ledger, Trezor, Coldcard, Bitbox, the main sort of half a dozen. There's so many of these others that have just come out of nowhere. Often many of them are from the Asian region. And I say the same thing to a lot of people. They just are not tried and trusted. They haven't been out of the marketplace long enough. They're not open source. They haven't been tested. You can't cut corners there. So, if you're talking about any sort of meaningful amount of money, maybe go to something that has had a decade worth of user testing and is open source and has been out on the marketplace and been fault free for the most part, for a long time. Why risk it with some random wallet that you just don't know anything about? And so here we are, in hindsight, they've had a major critical vulnerability with their devices. So
yeah,
yeah,
that's great.
I don't know how
I
anyone
agree.
could ever use them again.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Like, yeah, you need to use something that is tried and tested. Like, you don't want to take a gamble with some kind of not well-known wallet. It's very important. And yeah, with Tangem also, how I heard about it was people, usually shitcoiners, and we don't know much about the spice, and they ask about different hardware wallets, and they mentioned Tangem, and that's how I heard about it in the last few months.
Yeah,
So I'll read the response from Tangem. So apparently they fixed this now, but they did eventually respond, and they said, and again I'm quoting now: when activating a wallet with a seed phrase by generating or importing one, the private key was mistakenly logged in the mobile app's logs. These logs could later be accessed during interactions with our support team. So that was the error. They did say, and I don't know if this is correct, but they did say that it only affected 0.1% of their users. In which case that's good, but still, like, that's a very, like, that's like a, I don't know if you can get any worse than that in terms of vulnerability, but they do say it only affected a small portion of their users.
That's probably because only a small portion of them actually interacted with their support team, right? That's their way of saying it affected 100% of their users, but not all of them interacted to make the triggers unfold, right? It's a clever way to like throw it under the rug. The reality is you broke every single one of your customers' hardware wallets. Some of them didn't have to find the break, thankfully, but yeah, that's business suicide. You can't come back from that, in my opinion. Like if you,
I think actually, but I think that's not completely correct. It's not just people who interact with the support. I think there was some other condition. I think they needed to generate the wallet activated with a seed phrase. I think what we mean, if it was a generated seed phrase, this didn't occur. It's only when you gave it. So there was some other condition that, it was something else.
So maybe that is true. Maybe it did only affect a subset of their users, but still, like, how does that pass quality assurance? Like when they're building this hardware wallet, like the number one golden rule of a hardware wallet is don't leak the seed phrase. Like everything else is irrelevant. You can have Bluetooth, you can have a beautiful touch screen, you can have all the features you want, but if your hardware wallet leaks the seed phrase, you're not doing your job. Like you've lost it the first step. So I don't like, it's such an oversight that like who have they got working in their development team and their engineering team to let this slip through the crack? Like this is something that you should test 1,000 times over before you even think about what button you want to put on the device.
Yeah, well, I guess it was an edge case scenario, and the thing is, like, it can happen in some ways, but if you have like a wallet that's been around for many years, like if it would have happened, it would have been fixed up, and if you have invested enough in your quality assurance, it probably won't happen. So it's not like, it's definitely a very big strike against them.
Yeah.
I think we've gone for like about an hour now, so I think maybe we'll finish the episode for today. Thanks for joining us, Chris, and thanks for organizing Bitcoin Live. I'll be there, and anybody listening, like if you can make it to Sydney, it's going to be a great event. It's going to be very fun, and the tickets are reasonably cheap. I think. Do you know how much are they right now?
I think general admission tickets as they stand right now are $349. But, I would like to also thank you, Daniel, for coming on board as a sponsor for the last 2 years, but of course for this year as well with HardBlock. I think you can use the discount code HardBlock with a capital H and a capital B to get 21% off your tickets. So irrespective of whatever the price is and whatever ticket you're going for, if you use the discount code HardBlock, you'll get 21% off. So, keep some sats in your own pockets if you can. This event is not free or not cheap or not easy to put on. We try our best to keep the tickets at a reasonable this, a price point. But the reality of it is things do cost money, and those things that cost us money are going up in cost when priced in dollar terms, unfortunately. When priced in Bitcoin, they're going down like everything. But unfortunately, all of our suppliers don't accept Bitcoin. So, use the discount code. We'd love to see everyone there. It's going to be a hell of a lot of fun for Bitcoin Alive this year. We really can't wait. And thanks again for your support, Dan. It's really appreciated.
Okay. Just hit the exact 1 hour mark. Okay. Thanks, Chris, and see you soon.
No worries. Thanks, Daniel.
Australian Bitcoin podcast presented by HardBlock, Australia's first Bitcoin only exchange.